Hi guys, today we're going to be creating this giant fireball coming down, crashing into Earth and killing everyone. We're going to be using Cinema 4D, the new Pyro tag and After Effects. Let's get started on this, here we go. So what I've done is I've brought in my footage into After Effects and I've turned it into an image sequence. This is the image sequence here, it's in the composition. You guys can download the full image sequence from the description below, so you're going to be able to follow along with the tutorial. So with that done, let's jump into Cinema 4D. Maybe go into my track layout here, double click to create a motion tracker object, and double click again so that we can select the footage. So I have it saved in a folder called End of Days in here, and let's grab that. So the first thing I want to do is turn up the resampling. So it's going to give us a nice crisp view of the footage. And also I want to load all of the frames into cache. So let's just hit play. That's going to load each frame into cache, and then we're going to get closer to real-time playback. I'll just pause the video here while that's loading itself in. Okay, so that's done, and you can see now we're getting a much smoother playback. So let's just pause that and go back to frame 0. We're going to go to the Objects tab now. We're going to start setting this up to track the camera. Make sure your motion tracker object is selected, go into the 2D tracking tab, and for a number of tracks, we want more than that, we'll go for 600. And let's create some auto tracks. So that's going to give us a bunch of auto tracks. Now it's tracking the clouds and it's tracking the river. We don't want it to do that because first of all, the river has reflections and ripples, and second of all, the clouds are going to be moving ever so slightly. So we don't want them track those auto tracks on any clouds or on any river. So let's use our, I'm skipping ahead, use the lasso selection tool to grab all of those, lasso all of those, and hit delete. And let's do the same for any ones that are on or beside the river. And delete those. Cool. So with that done, click on your motion tracker object again in the 2D tracking tab. We're going to track forward. Because we're on frame 0, it makes sense that we want to track forward. So let's do that now. That's processing each of the frames from the first to the last. So now if we scrub, you can see that we have a bunch of these track points that are following along with whatever pixel they decided they want to follow along with. So you can see that we've lost a good few of the ones that we had at the start. So what we're going to do is go to the last frame. We're going to create another bunch of auto tracks. Again, we're going to select the ones that we don't want to keep and hit delete. Same again for the ones on or near the river. And delete those. So as we're on the last frame, it now would make sense that we're going to be tracking backwards. So that's going to process pretty quick. And now we're going to get a bunch of these track points that we have some at the start and we have some at the end. Cool. So again, click on your motion tracker object. This time we're going to be going to the 3D Solve tab. Now before I run the 3D Solver, I want to tell Cinema that I know the focal length. So I shot this footage with my DJI Mini 2 drone, and I know that the focal length of those is, I should say, 24 mil. So I'm going to type in 24 millimeters. And now we can run the solver. So that's going to do its business. You can see it's loading down there. So I'll pause the video while that's doing it and we'll pop back in once it's done. Okay, so that's finished. So now if we unfold this, you can see that we've been given a solved camera and we have a bunch of these auto features. Now the auto features aren't visible. If we deselect the motion tracker, we can see that there they are. Now if we hit play, you can see what they're doing. Okay, so now if I was to create an object, it's going to appear right bang in front of the camera because it doesn't know where world center is. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell the motion tracker, we're going to tell Cinema where world center is. So click on the motion tracker object, go to tracker, constraints, and let's create a position constraint. Now I'm going to select this one as my position constraint because this is, in my mind, world center. The other reason I'm selecting this one is if I scrub forward from frame 0 to the last frame, you can see that that particular one is visible for the entirety of the shot. So I'm going to select this one as my world center. And now if I deselect the motion tracker, you can see that we have this as the world center. If I was to create a figure and hit play, you can see that he's been created and he's been plopped right in world center. You'll also notice that he is a huge giant, even though he's only 180 centimeters tall. Now the reason for that is that Cinema has no idea of scale. So we're going to give it an idea of scale right now. So let's click on the motion tracker object. This time we're going to go to tracker, constraints, and create vector constraint. Now with this we're going to be able to select 2 points along any given direction. So I'm going to select these two which look like they're traveling along the Z axis. We could select, say, these two which are traveling along the Y axis, or these two which look like they're traveling along the X axis. But I'm going to go for these two here, so this one and this one. It's going to give us a little grey line, probably quite hard to see. But what we're going to tell Cinema is we know that this line is going along the Z-axis, and we also know the length. Now, I'm going to take a wild guess at the length. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to say it's maybe 2 meters. I mean, I'm terrible at guessing lengths. So I'm just going to type in 200 centimeters and hit enter. Now, if we look at our guy, now our work plane is in the way, so I'm going to go to filter and turn off the work plane. Now, if we look at our guy, you can see that he's standing on this bridge, which is quite far in the distance. If I hit play, he looks still a bit big for the bridge, like compared to a human, but it's much better than what it was. And that's fine for what we're doing. So let's turn him off. We don't want to see him. Now we can start creating our fireball. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is create a sphere. This is what we're going to be using to generate our fire and our smoke. So we're going to find a position for this. Well, we don't really have to find a position for this because we're going to determine the position of this using a spline. And the spline is what this is going to be traveling along. So if I go into my top view here, let's zoom out. So I want the sphere to travel along this kind of a direction from here. This is our camera, out of shot. It's going to travel from here over to here. And I want it traveling kind of parallel to the camera. So I'm going to grab my pen tool and I'm going to go pretty far back. You can see that we have track points all the way back here. I want the sphere to be really far away from the camera, but at the same time it's going to be so big, like a meteor, like an Earth destroying meteor would be, that we're still going to be able to see it. So I'm going to create a spline, an anchor point here, and one over here, so that it's kind of parallel to the camera. And now if I jump into my front view, we can have a look at that spline. So I want to grab my spline, make sure model mode is selected. I'm going to move it up ever so slightly, and I'm going to rotate it ever so slightly as well. Something like that. Okay, so now you can see it has a bit of a slant on it. We can do it moving that up a lot more. And we can do, as it's the first anchor point is here, we want it to be out of the shot. So I'm just going to click and drag. Something else we can do to get our axis handle closer to our spline is enable axis mode, bring that down, and then disable axis mode. Now our axis handles are much closer to our spline. That makes it a bit easier. Okay, so that looks like a decent path for our fireball to follow along. I might bring it up a bit further and I might rotate it. This time I'm going to go and click on the spline object, go into the coordinates tab, and I'm going to be able to rotate it using this parameter here. If I hold down Alt before I click, I can make small adjustments to that rotation. And I'm going to push it up a little bit more. Okay, so now how do we get our sphere to travel along this path? So we need to right-click on our sphere, go to Animation Tags and grab an Align to Spline tag. Now in our Spline Path field, we can drag down this spline to tell it this is the spline we want it to align to. So now if I go to my Align to Spline tag and move this position slider, you can see that the sphere is now traveling from the first anchor point to the last anchor point. Let's increase the size of our sphere. So I'm going to scale this up so that it's a huge meteor. And it's pretty far away from the camera, so that's pretty huge. Maybe even a little bit bigger. And something like that. So now let's animate this. So we want to grab our Align to Spline tag and let's just bring this. I'm going to hold down Alt before I click so I can make smaller adjustments. We're going to just bring in this just slightly out of the shot, like so. Now this percentage value is going to be different for you guys because everybody is going to have a different length spline. Okay, so just make sure that whatever this is, don't worry about the value itself. Just make sure that the sphere is just outside the shot. And let's add a keyframe on frame 0. Now we're going to go to the last frame and we're going to animate this so it's just going outside the shot and add another keyframe. So now if we play that back, you can see that we have our animation. Now one thing you'll notice is it's slowly coming in, then it's speeding up and it's going to slowly go out. We don't want it to do that. So what we do is open up the dope sheet and let's just have a look at this. Click on the Align to Spline tag and we can set the interpolation to linear. Or you can use the keyframe or the shortcut L on your keyboard. So now if we close the manager down and if we hit play on this, you'll see it comes in and it's traveling along the spline at the same speed that it came in, and it's going to exit out at the same speed that it's traveling along the spline. Cool. So at this stage, we're ready to create the fire. Now let's do a file save as, because you guys are going to have to do a save as. I can just save project. I've already named this end of days. Now the reason I'm saving at this stage is because Pyro has crashed my machine so many times, so it's a good idea to save it right now. So let's get into the fun part. So right click on the sphere, go to simulation tags and click on Pyro. Now before I hit play, because I don't want to crash my machine, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the object voxel size to 100. And I'm going to go into the Pyro default object, click on the Pyro tab, and I'm going to bring the Pyro voxel size up to 100. Now that is very high, and that is going to mean a lot less detail in our fire and in our smoke. But as our comet or our meteor is so very far away from the camera, it's not going to make a difference. And we have much less chance of crashing our machines as well. If we're doing a close-up shot of fire, you'd have to have this at a much lower value. So again, I'll do a file save. I'm going to go back to frame 0, and I'm going to hit play, and I'm going to hope for the best. Okay, so as you can see, our computers, well, my computer is not crashing, and we're not getting any VRAM error messages or anything like that. Cool. So now we can look at, I suppose, how this is looking. So I'm just going to bring it into about there. And we're going to change the render settings to Redshift because that's the only way we're going to be able to render this. We can't render it with the standard renderer. Pyro can only be rendered using Redshift in Cinema 4D. So now I'm going to jump into my Redshift layout, which I've already set up. And if I just turn this to fit window and hit play, and we'll see what we get. So I'm getting an abort rendering due to the following error. So, okay, so a fix that I found for this, if you guys are getting this message, is just to do a file, save, close down Cinema, I'll close down Cinema, and I'm going to open it up again. So you guys hopefully are not getting that error message, but I get it a lot. It could be my machine, or it could be Pyro, I don't know. But I found that just closing down Cinema and opening it all up again kind of fixes it. So let's just play this again. And we'll pause it right there, jump back into Redshift. Hopefully that will render for us. Okay, so it's not going to render because what we haven't done is, so let's stop that, go back to frame 0, go into the Pyro default object, and we need to turn on density, which is our smoke, turn on temperature, which is our fire. Now we also, if I try and render this now, we're still not going to get anything because we need to create a Pyro material, a Pyro volume material. So go up to open up your materials manager, go to create Redshift materials, Pyro volume material, actually it's called. Let's pop that onto the Pyro default object. And now, if we play this now, so maximum amount of VRAM allocated, blah, blah, blah. Don't worry about that for now. Okay, well, we're going to have to worry about it for now. Hang on a second. Let's see. Let's jump back into the standard view and see if we can play it now. Hopefully it won't give us the same error message. If it does, I'll just pause it a little bit earlier. Seems okay. Okay, that's fine. So now if we go into Redshift and hopefully, yeah, okay, so now it's rendering. It doesn't look great at the moment, so we need to create a bit of lighting. So I'm going to grab a dome light and I'm going to, for the texture, I'm going to select one of the frames from the image sequence. So any one of these, that's going to give us a bit of lighting information. Just say no to that. And we can turn off the background as well. And also I want to see my background in my Redshift render view as well. So let's go down to backplate, turn that on. Let's grab the movie sequence, say no to that. Let's unravel this little texture button here, go into the animation tab, turn this on to simple and detect frames. Let's pause that and render it again. Oh, we didn't turn on the background. So in your Redshift dome light, go into the object tab, turn on background. Cool. Okay, so what we can see here is our smoke is kind of disappearing a bit too soon, so we don't want it to do that. So let's just stop rendering this, go back to standard. I'm going to do a file save. Let's just play this for a little bit more. So our smoke is disappearing a bit too soon. So what we can do is go into the Pyro default, I think it is, the Pyro default object, and scroll down to relative density dissipation. So remember, density is the smoke. Let's set this down to a value of about 0.5. Now if we play that again, hopefully now we'll have smoke that's going to stick around for a lot longer. So yeah, you can see now our smoke is sticking around for a lot longer, which is nice. Also, I'd like the smoke to kind of float up. It seems to be just staying along this spline. So what I wanted to do is kind of float up as the sphere or the fireball is traveling along the spline. So to do that, we're going to go to, in the Pyro default object, we're going to go to density buoyancy, and I'll set this to -300. Now let's have a look at this. Control S to save. Let's see how that's looking. Okay, so now you can see our smoke is kind of traveling up along. Another thing I'm going to do actually is I'm going to close down After Effects, and that could give us some VRAM allocation error messages as well. So I'll close this down, and then we'll have a bit more VRAM to work with. So let's have a look and see how this is looking now. Okay, so it's looking okay. Let's see if we go to the original size and see what it's looking like. So the smoke is very black. So it's probably that we don't have enough light in our scene. Let's go to the dome light object and crank up the intensity of this. So that's a bit better. Go a bit more. All the way up. Yeah, something like that. I think looks a bit better. And also I don't like this glow that I'm getting around the, the smoke. It looks a bit fake. So I'm gonna go into my Pyro volume material, click on this node here. Then we can close this down, and let's have a look in the material settings here. If I scroll all the way down to emission scale, let's set this to like 0.1. So now you can see that we've got rid of that glow. Now we don't really have enough fire. We have enough smoke. We have a good bit of smoke. So we want to increase the amount of fire. So if I go into the, let's just stop this from rendering, go back to frame 0, go into file save again, and let's go into the Pyro tag. Now let's go and where's temperature? So temperature is our fire. This is how we control our fire. So let's set this to like a really crazy value. But we're going to need a crazy value because remember, this is an earth-shattering meteor, right? And then add, so this is the amount it's going to add over time. So we'll go up to like 5,000 on that as well. Let's see what that looks like. So that looks like it's given us a lot of fire. That's looking pretty cool actually. So if I pause that here, let's see what that's looking like now. Oh yeah, so that's looking nice. Looking much better. Okay, so I think that's looking pretty good. I don't think there's anything else I'd like to do with this. So I'll stop that from rendering, do a file save. I'm going to go into my standard, and I'm just going to keep playing this, and hopefully we won't get a VRAM allocation error. Just let this play for a little bit longer because I want to see what it looks like kind of when it gets to like the center or close to the edge of the shot at least. So yeah, that should be fine. So let's go and see what this is looking like now. Yeah, that's looking pretty cool. Okay guys, I think I'm happy enough with that. So back into standard view now. So before we render this out, what we have to do is, we have to do a couple of things. Because remember, we don't want to see the sphere. Well, we can't really see it anyway, but the sphere I'm talking about is this. It's visible at the moment, so there might be times where the fire reveals it, and we don't want that to happen. So first of all, we need to cache this simulation. Back to frame 0, go to the Pyro default tab, and just make sure that density is turned on, which is the fire, temperature, or the smoke, temperature, which is the fire, is turned on. And we're going to do a Control S to save, and we're going to go to the cache tab, and let's cache the scene. So it's going to save this cache here, so that's fine. Click on save. So that's going to cache the simulation, so it might take a bit of time. Looks like it's actually going quite fast, but I'm assuming it's going to slow down pretty soon. So I'll pause the video now in a minute, and pause the video, we'll pop back in when it's done. Okay, so that's all saved to cache. So now we can actually scrub this. And you can see that we're able to scrub, but it doesn't give us the nice smoke when we're scrubbing. Seems like the smoke is just not even there anymore. Hang on, let's check that. Oh yeah, it's still there, okay. Just doesn't seem like it is in the viewport. And let's just go to the very end, like close to the last frame. And let's play that, or see what that looks like. Yeah. Okay, guys, that's looking pretty good. And, oh yeah, the sphere's visibility. So I have just used these little traffic lights before. Do you know, I've double-clicked and turned those red, and I had problems with my render. Now, it could be a glitch, or it could just be in my system. But instead of doing that, just to avoid any complications, if there are any to be caused, what I did was I just went to my render tags and added a Redshift object tab, and then in the visibility tab I clicked on override and turned primary ray visible off. And that ensures that the sphere will never be visible for the render. So we're going to be rendering this out without the motion tracker visible, so we don't want to show the footage through the camera. And also we want to turn off the background of our dome light. So now we're going to be rendering this out as a transparent background PNG. Excuse me now for what am I talking about. So yeah, we're going to be able to render this out with the alpha channel turned on. So go into your render settings, and in the save, we're going to turn on alpha channel. That way we're just going to be able to bring the render into After Effects and overlay it on top of our footage. For output, it's going to be 1920 by 1080, and it's going to be all frames. We're going to save. We're not saving a multipass image. Go to save this as a PNG sequence, and let's create a folder for this. Sequences, and we just call it end of days. Okay. In the Redshift settings, everything's fine. We don't need to change anything. And that's it. So now we'll do a file, save, and I'm going to render this to picture viewer because I've also had a bit of trouble rendering this out to using the render queue. Now again, I'm getting a message here again, so I'll just close down Cinema and I'll open it again. So now if I render to picture viewer now, good old turning it off and turning it on again never fails, does it? Okay guys, so that's going to render away. Once that's finished, we're going to pop into After Effects, bring in the footage, overlay it over our original footage, and then we are done. So we'll pop back in once it's done. Okay, so that's finished rendering. So we can jump now into After Effects, and let's bring in, first of all, well, we can bring in the rendered sequence, and we also need to bring in the image sequence of the actual footage. So let's drag down the footage down here to this little composition icon and release. There's our footage. And now if we drag down our rendered sequence, here we have it. So I want to load this into RAM so that I'm going to get a nice smooth playback. So I'll pause the video and then we'll pop back in once that's done. Okay, so that's loaded into RAM now. So now we're getting a smooth playback. And as you can see, it's all looking really well. It's looking nice, cool, realistic. What we can do is we can add a few finishing touches to this. So if we select our end of days sequence, and if we go here to our effects and presets, if you can't see that, it'll be there. And let's grab a Lumetri color effect. Double click. Before you do that, just make sure this layer is selected. Then we can double click to automatically apply it. If we unravel basic correction, what we can do is we can increase the temperature of this. It's looking a bit white, so we can make that a little bit more yellow. Something like that. For tint, I don't want to change anything there. We can bring up the exposure a bit. And contrast possibly a little bit as well. Highlights, I'm going to leave that as is. Shadows, we can bring that down, just darken that smoke in the middle part there. Whites, we could bring it up a little bit, I suppose. Or up a little bit. And blacks, I think that's fine as is. We don't need to, I'm not going to change the blacks. So a lot of this is personal preference as well. I might go down a bit on the blacks. Okay, cool. So that is done with regards to correcting the actual colors of that. Next, what we can do is we can add a bit of reflection. So as this is traveling over the river, it'd be cool to have the river reflected. So to do that, what we can do is duplicate this layer, hit Control D to do that, hit Enter to rename. We'll just call this reflection. So now if we drag this down, we have two layers of the same, and let's go to Layer, Transform, and we can flip vertical. Let's just drag that up. I'm going to hit R on my keyboard with this layer selected, so I'm going to be able to rotate this a little bit, something like that maybe. Yeah. And I'm going, actually, let me just, something like that, I'd say. Yeah, cool. And I'm going to scale this up as well to something like this size. And what we can do to make this a bit more like a reflection is we can change the blending mode to overlay. And we can bring down the opacity. To a nice low value. And also, as we don't want to see this in the grass, we don't want to see the grass, we don't want to see the fireball in the grass, obviously. So we can create a mask around the river so that we're going to cut away any parts that are going to show up in the grass. So with the reflection layer selected, let's grab our pen tool. And if we just go back to the point just before the fireball enters the river, we can just create a nice simple mask. It doesn't have to be exact around the bank of the river. Like that. So now if we play this, you'll see that we're no longer seeing the reflection in the grass, only in the river. We are going to have to animate this mask just a little bit. So if we unravel the masks here, unravel mask 1. Let's create a keyframe on mask path just before the reflection comes in. Let's scrub, and then we can grab our selection tool and just lasso all of these anchor points and just bring them forward a bit. Let's just fix this one. It doesn't matter anyway, you can't really see it there, so that's fine. Go forward a bit more. And let's drag this again. And then that's going to go out of shot. Perfect. So let's have a look at what that looks like. Okay, I might even go down a bit more with the opacity. So just select the reflection layer, hit T in your keyboard, and we can bring that down even more. Down to like 7 maybe. Yeah, so that looks a bit better. And one more thing, it's probably not necessary, but what we could do is grab a warp effect, wave warp. With the reflection layer selected, let's double click on that. And we're going to go for the smooth noise. And now that's going to kind of create some ripples. Might be a bit too much, so we can reduce the wave height down to like 4 or something like that. Again, the difference is negligible, so it's probably an unnecessary step. But that is it, guys. That brings us to the end of the tutorial. So again, hope you learned a lot. If you did, please let me know in the comments. Smash that like button and consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.